What's going on, everybody? Welcome to Fantasy Football Over Analysis. Today we're talking about the Los Angeles Rams, their fantasy relevant players, and whether or not we are targeting or fading them in our drafts this summer. At quarterback, Matt Stafford comes off of a fantastic year where he finishes as the QB3 overall. Stafford last season throws for over 4,700 yards and over 45 touchdowns with only 8 interceptions. It was a fantastic year for the veteran quarterback, and he was an awesome value at the end of drafts last year. The thing about those numbers, though, are they're actually a pretty significant outlier for Stafford throughout his career. And I think that Stafford is a candidate for regression this year. Stafford has only finished as a QB1 2 times in the last 8 seasons. In his 5 years with the Rams, he's been in the mid QB2 ranks 3 of the 5 seasons. So Stafford's history suggests that he's more likely to come back to that QB2 range than he would be to finish as a QB1 again. With Stafford, you know he's not giving you anything on the ground with his legs. So if the high-end, prolific passing numbers aren't there week to week like they were last season, then he doesn't have any other path to help inflate his numbers. Also, look at the situation with the Rams. Stafford himself is age 38. Davante Adams is another year older and finished the year struggling with hamstring issues last year. Obviously, you still have Puka Nacua there and in his prime, but I just think it's going to be so hard for Stafford to repeat the numbers that he put up last year. I still think he'll be fine. He'll have a good season, but he's not going to significantly outperform his ADP like he did a year ago. Then at running back, I think that the fantasy community continues to criminally underrate Kyren Williams and what he's been able to do. Williams, for 3 years in a row now, has been an RB1. He runs for over 1,000 yards every year. He scores double-digit touchdowns. He plays on third downs. He gets the key looks in the receiving game that you want your running backs to have. He just doesn't play a full snap share. And when people talk about fading Kyren Williams, they always point to Blake Corum and the amount of work that he gets. And to be honest, I've never understood what the fuss is about Blake Corum. I don't care that Blake Corum might play 40% of the snaps. Blake Corum is not going to be the guy at the goal line. Blake Corum is not going to be the guy in the receiving game. Do you want to know how many passes Blake Corum caught last year? 8. What are we worried about 8 passes for? Meanwhile, Kyren still comes away with 50 targets and 36 catches. So, to me, I think that Blake Corum being worked in as much as he is fine. If anything, it keeps Kyren Williams fresh, it keeps him efficient, it keeps him capable of doing what he's done over the last 3 years and what I expect him to continue to do. So I think Kyren Williams is just such a safe pick in the third rounds of drafts. Here you've got a running back who, again, has consistent RB1 numbers on his resume that you know is attached to a good offense that's going to be in a lot of winning game scripts. And you can get him easily as your RB2. I'd be fine with Kyren Williams as my RB1 if I were to start, say, wide receiver and then Brock Bowers in rounds 1 and 2. And in any other build, you get him as your RB2, that's phenomenal. So if my league mates want to fade Kyren Williams, I will happily snatch him up every time. And then at wide receiver, Puka Nacua comes off of a fantastic year where he finishes as the wide receiver 1 overall. Puka with just a ridiculous 166 targets for 129 catches, with over 1,700 yards and 10 touchdowns. He was just a beast last season. This year, however, Puka's going to be a fade for me. And it's kind of similar to what I was saying about Jackson Smith and Jigba in the Seattle video, where if you look at the history of the guys that recently have finished as the wide receiver 1 overall, things just kind of tend to happen that following season. It's very hard for those guys to not come down from what they did a year ago. Again, look at Jamar Chase just last season. The year before, Chase was the wide receiver 1, winning the Triple Crown. Last season, he comes down a bit, and it wasn't all his fault. There's other circumstances there, the Joe Burrow injury being the biggest one of them all. But those are just the kind of weird, unpredictable, uncontrollable things that happen that make it hard for these guys to repeat year to year. And again, going back to what I said about Matt Stafford, if I'm projecting that Stafford is going to regress a little bit from the passing numbers that made him the QB3 overall in fantasy last year, then that regression also has to impact the pass catchers. So if Stafford isn't throwing for 4,700 yards and 45 touchdowns, then everybody else's numbers have to come down a bit too. So it's hard for me to imagine Puka with another 130 catch season with 1,700 yards and 10 scores. All three of those categories have got to take a bit of a hit. And like with JSN, that's not to say that Puka is going to be bad or Puka is not going to finish in the wide receiver 1 ranks, but relative to where you're going to draft him, which a lot of people are going to still take him as the wide receiver 1 overall, you're probably going to be disappointed on the pick that you invest in him. For me, Jamar Chase is my wide receiver 1 overall. I would take him above both Puka and JSN, and I also think that Amon-Ra St. Brown is a much safer pick at the wide receiver position than either Puka or JSN this year. And then you have Davante Adams, and Davante is also going to be a fade for me this year. Davante last year was just an absolute monster in the red zone, scoring 14 touchdowns. And while that's great, Davante also did not get a lot of volume last year. Think about it. Adams caught 60 passes, 14 of those went for touchdowns, which means nearly 1/4 of his total receptions all went for scores. If that's not a screaming obvious regression number, I don't know what is. And then you have the health issues. So Davante last year finished out the year with some hamstring issues, and it's just the kind of thing that happens to wide receivers when they get into their 30s. But once the soft tissue issues start creeping in, they just become more and more frequent for these guys the older they get. And as much as we love Davante Adams, we all know that everybody has an age limit in the NFL. Father Time is undefeated in that regard. So, and here's another thing with Davante Adams that I don't think a lot of people have talked about. During the offseason, the Rams tried to pick up A.J. Brown from the Philadelphia Eagles, and one of the stipulations for that trade to happen would have been that the Rams would have moved Davante Adams somewhere else in that deal. And the Rams have shown that they're a pretty smart organization. They generally have a pretty good feel about when it's time to move on from a player. Look at last season when they got Davante Adams. They were perfectly happy to let go of Cooper Kupp, who was such a big part of what they had done for a long time. Kupp played a major role in winning them their Super Bowl. And as much of a hero as he was for that franchise and as great a rapport as he had with Matt Stafford in the past, when the Rams looked at him, they saw a declining player. So when it was time for him to go, it was time for him to go. So if the Rams were that willing to move off of Davante Adams, then that tells me that, they've seen him up close. They saw how he finished the year. They probably see the signs of a declining player. So Adams to me is going to be a fade. I think there's just going to be a natural regression for the 14 touchdowns that he scored last year. I also have the concerns about him being able to stay healthy over the course of a year, and I have concerns about Matt Stafford's passing numbers as a whole coming down. At the tight end position, the Rams just won't stop bringing in tight ends. They added Max Clare with a second-round pick this year. They still have Terrence Ferguson, their draft pick from last year, and veterans like Colby Parkinson, Tyler Higbee. If there is one guy in this group that I would have interest in, it would be Terrence Ferguson, and I think the cost is going to be so low on him that as a late-round flyer, he's perfectly fine. But at the same time, I don't have particularly high expectations for this group. I think they're going to kind of cannibalize each other. So the tight end position, Ferguson I'm fine with as an end of the draft kind of guy, but I'm not leaning on any of these guys to be in my starting lineup for week 1. And that's going to do it for this one, guys. So with the Rams, where I have the most interest in is Kyren Williams. I think he's as safe as they come. I think he's practically locked in to finish as an RB1, and I love getting that in round 3 of drafts. The passing game, I think there's going to be a lot of regression there. Everyone from Matt Stafford to Puka to Davante. So that's all going to be fades for me. But I thank you guys so much for watching, and we will talk to you next time when we go over the Arizona Cardinals.